Are there any questions? And please, I'd like to see some hands being raised. I know some of you have put deodorant on, so you're worried about us smelling you. But it's okay, you can raise your hands. It's all right. This is supposed to be school. We're supposed to be all eager to ask questions from people. So I know there's a few of my students here, and I will look begrudgingly at them if they don't raise their hands. Come on now. All right, very good. Good for you. Go ahead.
All right, first of all, I'll talk about what's the relationship between classism and racism. Would you argue that classism may indeed perpetuate racism, especially in a classist society? A large number of minorities are in the lower class. And because of that, maybe racism does indeed exist. Also, I guess I would also want to talk about maybe how maybe minorities could succeed in our society. Franz Fanon talks about, he was a psychologist and philosopher. He talks about how a minority has to become white. Because, and especially because he was black, how it got all thrown back in his face because he was black. He could talk about all the important issues of philosophy, theology, especially psychology, but because he was black from Martinique and had a lisp, or a tone in his talk, it was thrown back in his face. Maybe expand on that a little.
Sure. Okay, so the first issue that you asked was about classism, and I think race and class frequently get confounded, in two ways. Number one, a lot of times, within different racial or ethnic groups, there are different social economic classes similar to the majority population. Does classism promote racism? It's difficult to answer the question because they're so twisted together. Okay. However, so for example, as a middle-class African-American woman, I still experience racism. And I would if I were in a lower socioeconomic class or even a higher socioeconomic class. But the type of racism I might experience might be different. Does that make sense? Okay, so the type of racism I might experience might be different. You mentioned a couple things. So I'm not familiar with the psychologist you mentioned. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing. But there is a phenomenon called code switching, in which, does an African American person or a person of color have to become white, quote unquote, to be successful?